32, Amara Okoye had everything most people spent their entire lives chasing. Power, fame, wealth, and yet she often felt strangely alone. From the outside, her life looked like a dream. Her face appeared on magazine covers beside headlines that called her Africa's youngest female tech billionaire. Business channels debated her strategies. Universities invited her to speak. Investors competed for a chance to partner with her. But success had not come easily. Amara had built her empire from nothing. She grew up in a modest neighborhood in Enugu, the eldest daughter of a schoolteacher father and a mother who sold fabrics at the local market. Her parents worked hard to raise 4 children, but money was always scarce. Electricity often disappeared for days. Food had to stretch longer than it should. Yet from a young age, Amara had been different. While other children played outside in the dusty streets, she spent hours studying old computer manuals borrowed from the school library. Her father once brought home a broken desktop computer that the school had thrown away. Amara fixed it. At just 14 years old, her parents were shocked. "You're going to be something special," her father had said proudly. Those words stayed with her. Years later, they became true. After graduating at the top of her university class in computer engineering, Amara launched a small digital payment startup from a tiny rented apartment in Lagos. At the time, she had only 2 second-hand laptops, unstable internet, and a dream bigger than anything she could afford. People laughed at her. Banks refused to partner with her. Investors ignored her. But Amara had a stubborn determination that refused to give up. She worked day and night coding systems, designing apps, and pitching her ideas. Slowly, things began to change. Her payment platform made sending money across the country faster and easier than ever before. Small businesses adopted it first. Then large companies followed. Within 5 years, her company exploded. Within 8 years, it was worth billions. And suddenly, the girl who once fixed a broken computer in a dark classroom had become one of the most powerful women in the country. Success changed everything, especially the way people treated her. Her once small family house had been replaced with a massive mansion sitting on a hill overlooking Lagos. The house was a masterpiece of glass walls, polished marble floors, and enormous balconies that faced the ocean. Luxury cars filled her garage. A staff of 20 people worked inside the house. Security guards patrolled the gates. Everything about her life screamed wealth. And with that wealth came people. Lots of people. Her younger brother, Kelechi, moved into the mansion almost immediately after her success became public. He arrived one afternoon carrying 3 suitcases and a wide grin. "Sis, Lagos traffic is terrible," he had joked as he settled into the guest wing. "I might as well stay here." Amara laughed and welcomed him. After all, he was family. Soon after, her cousins began visiting frequently. At first, they came during holidays, then weekends. Eventually, they appeared almost every week. Every visit came with stories. One cousin needed money to start a business. Another needed help paying school fees. Another wanted to open a boutique. Amara helped them all. She paid for education. She funded businesses. She solved problems. To her, family meant responsibility. And she never hesitated to support them. But something slowly changed. Her parents moved into the mansion as well, enjoying a comfortable life they had never experienced before. Her mother no longer needed to sell fabrics in the market. Her father retired from teaching. "Your hard work has blessed this entire family," her mother often said. Those words made Amara proud. Still, the mansion was rarely quiet anymore. Family members came and went constantly. Parties filled the weekends. Business partners visited frequently. Investors arrived from different countries. Yet despite all the noise and activity, Amara sometimes felt invisible in her own home. One evening during a large family dinner, she sat at the head of the table while laughter filled the room. Her cousin Adiz was showing off a new designer handbag. "This one cost almost $2,000, she said excitedly. Kelechi chuckled. "That's nothing. Wait until you see the car I'm planning to buy." Everyone talked loudly, sharing plans and jokes. But no one asked Amara how her day had been. No one asked how she felt. No one asked if she was tired. They simply assumed she was fine. Because she was rich. Amara smiled politely and ate her dinner quietly. Later that night, she stood alone on her balcony overlooking the glittering lights of Lagos. The ocean breeze brushed softly against her face. From inside the mansion, she could still hear laughter echoing from the living room. Yet standing there alone, she felt a strange emptiness in her chest. Sometimes she wondered something she was almost afraid to admit. If all the money disappeared tomorrow, would these people still be here? She shook the thought away immediately. "Don't be ridiculous," she murmured to herself. They were family. Of course they would stay. The next morning, Amara woke up early as usual. Her schedule was packed. 3 meetings with investors, product launch briefing, and an interview with an international business network. Her driver waited outside beside her black Rolls-Royce while security guards opened the gates. As she stepped into the car, her assistant handed her a tablet filled with documents. "Today will be busy, ma'am," the assistant said. Amara smiled. Every day is busy. The car pulled smoothly onto the road. Across the city, thousands of employees worked in offices connected to her company. Her digital banking platform had changed how millions of people handled money. People praised her everywhere. She was admired, respected, celebrated. But few truly knew her. Even fewer truly cared about her. Late that evening, after returning from work, Amara walked into the living room and found her brother lounging comfortably on the sofa. He was watching television while eating snacks. "Long day?" he asked casually without looking up. "Very," Amara replied. Kelechi turned down the volume. "By the way," he said, "I was thinking about expanding the family investments. Maybe buying some new properties." Amara placed her briefcase on the table. "How much?" "Just a few $1,000,000. She sighed slightly but nodded. "Talk to my finance manager tomorrow." Kelechi grinned. "You're the best sister in the world." Moments later, he returned his attention to the television. Amara watched him silently. Something about the moment bothered her, but she couldn't quite explain why. Later that night, as she walked toward her bedroom, she passed a mirror in the hallway. She stopped and stared at her reflection. Elegant dress, diamond earrings, confident posture, a billionaire admired by the world. Yet deep behind her eyes, there was a quiet exhaustion. Success had given her everything she once dreamed of, but sometimes felt like it had taken something away too. Amara turned off the lights and walked into her room. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything in her life would change. Her wealth, her power, her family, even her ability to walk. The woman who seemed to have everything was about to lose it all. And the people she trusted most would be the first to disappear. Rain fell heavily over Lagos that evening, drumming against rooftops and splashing violently against the streets. The sky had turned a deep shade of gray long before sunset, and the air carried the scent of an approaching storm. Inside the tall glass building that housed Okoye Digital Finance, the top floor lights were still on. Amara Okoye sat alone in her office. Most of the employees had already gone home hours earlier, but Amara remained seated at her desk, her eyes scanning the glowing screen of her laptop. Numbers, contracts, reports. The responsibilities of running a billion-dollar company never truly ended. Outside her window, lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the sprawling city below. Her assistant knocked softly on the office door before stepping in. "Ma'am," she said gently, "it's already past 8. Should I ask the driver to bring the car around?" Amara leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. Her head ached from hours of work. "Yes," she replied softly. "Let him bring the car." The assistant nodded. "And the investors from Dubai confirmed tomorrow's meeting." Amara gave a small tired smile. "Good. Send the documents to my email tonight." "Yes, ma'am." Moments later, the office was quiet again. Amara closed her laptop and stood up, stretching slightly. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass window. Beyond it, Lagos shimmered with countless city lights. It had been another long day, but days like this were normal for her. She grabbed her coat and walked out of the office. Downstairs, the rain had grown even heavier. The parking area lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating glowing golden pools across the ground. Her driver, Musa, stood beside the black Rolls-Royce with an umbrella. As Amara approached, he opened the door respectfully. "Good evening, madam." "Good evening, Musa." She stepped inside the car, grateful for the warm leather seats and quiet comfort. Musa got behind the wheel and started the engine. But just as he began pulling out of the parking lot, his phone buzzed loudly. He glanced at it and frowned. "Madam, my wife is calling." Amara looked up. "Is everything okay?" "I'm not sure," he replied anxiously. "She rarely calls me this late." Amara nodded kindly. "Answer it." Musa stepped out of the car to take the call. Amara waited patiently. Through the windshield she could see the rain pouring endlessly, bouncing against the pavement like silver needles. After a minute, Musa returned looking worried. "Madam, my wife is in the hospital. She is having complications with the pregnancy." Amara immediately sat up. "Go to her." "But madam." "Musa," she interrupted gently. "Your family comes first." He hesitated. "But how will you get home?" Amara smiled slightly. "I can drive." Musa still looked unsure, but eventually he nodded. "Thank you, madam." "Thank you." He quickly handed her the keys. "Please drive safely. The roads are very slippery tonight." Amara gave a reassuring nod. "Go. Your wife needs you." Within seconds, Musa rushed off into the rain. Amara moved into the driver's seat. She had not driven herself in months, but she was perfectly capable. She started the engine and slowly pulled onto the road. The city looked different during heavy rain. Traffic lights glowed brightly through the water-soaked air. Headlights stretched across the wet roads like shimmering lines. The windshield wipers moved rapidly back and forth, clearing the sheets of rain long enough for her to see. Amara drove carefully. The highway was less crowded than usual. Most people had already rushed home to escape the storm. Soft music played quietly from the car speakers as she focused on the road. For a moment, her mind drifted. She thought about tomorrow's meeting, the investors, the new expansion plans. Her company was about to enter 3 new countries. It was the biggest deal of her career. Lightning flashed again. The thunder that followed shook the sky. Amara tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The rain was getting worse. Suddenly, traffic ahead began slowing. A large truck was moving slowly in the next lane. Its bright red taillights glowed through the rain. Amara maintained a safe distance behind it. Then everything happened in seconds. The truck suddenly swerved violently. Its tires screeched against the wet road. The driver had lost control. Amara's heart jumped. "Oh no!" The truck spun sideways across the highway. Amara reacted instantly. She turned the steering wheel sharply to avoid crashing directly into it. But the road was too slippery. Her car skidded. The tires lost traction. The Rolls-Royce spun out of control across the wet pavement. Time seemed to slow. Amara's eyes widened in terror. The car slid toward the concrete divider at the edge of the highway. "God!" Crash. The sound of metal crushing echoed violently through the storm. The front of the car slammed into the divider. Airbags exploded open. Glass shattered everywhere. The world spun. Then everything went black. Amara floated through darkness. First, there was nothing. No sound. No light. Just silence. Then faint voices slowly began to reach her ears. "Pulse is weak. Get the stretcher. Careful with her spine." The voices sounded distant, like echoes underwater. Amara tried to open her eyes, but they felt impossibly heavy. She drifted back into darkness. When she finally woke again, the world smelled strongly of disinfectant. Bright white lights shone above her. Machines beeped steadily around the room. Amara blinked slowly. Her vision was blurry at first, but gradually the shapes around her became clearer. Hospital walls, medical equipment, a heart monitor. She tried to move. Pain shot through her body instantly. A weak gasp escaped her lips. A nurse standing nearby quickly noticed. "She's awake." Within seconds, more people rushed into the room. Doctors, nurses, and her mother. Her mother's eyes were red from crying. "Amara!" she cried, rushing to the bedside. "My daughter!" Amara's throat felt dry. "Mom!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're in the hospital," her mother said gently, holding her hand. "There was an accident." Fragments of memory flashed in Amara's mind. Rain, the truck, the crash. Her heart began racing. "My car." "The doctors say you're lucky to be alive," her mother said quickly. A tall doctor stepped forward. "Miss Okoye, I'm Dr. Adeyemi." Amara looked at him weakly. "How long have I been here?" "3 days." Her eyes widened slightly. "3? Yes." The doctor spoke calmly but seriously. "You suffered several injuries in the accident. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, and spinal trauma." The words felt heavy in the air. Spinal trauma. Amara tried to shift slightly on the bed. She couldn't feel anything below her waist. A cold wave of fear spread through her body. "Doctor," her voice trembled. "Why can't I move my legs?" The room went quiet. Her mother's grip tightened around her hand. The doctor sighed softly. "Miss Okoye, the accident caused severe damage to your spine." Amara stared at him. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears. "What does that mean?" The doctor hesitated. Then he spoke the words that would change her life forever. "You may never walk again." Silence filled the hospital room. Amara's mind struggled to process what she had just heard. Never walk again. The words felt impossible. She tried to move her legs again. Nothing happened. Panic surged through her chest. "No, no." Her breathing grew faster. "This can't be happening." Tears rolled down her mother's cheeks. But Amara barely noticed. Her entire world had just collapsed. The powerful billionaire who once ran companies, traveled across countries, and stood confidently before thousands of people, could no longer move her own legs. And she had no idea that the worst part of her story had not even begun yet. The first few days after the doctor's words felt like a nightmare Amara could not wake up from. "You may never walk again." The sentence echoed in her mind again and again. Every morning she woke up hoping it had only been a terrible dream. But each time she tried to move her legs, the same cold truth greeted her. Nothing moved. Nothing responded. Nothing. At first, the hospital room was always full. Her parents sat by her bedside almost constantly. Her younger brother Kelechi visited every afternoon carrying fruit baskets and expensive flowers. Her cousins showed up in groups, offering prayers and sympathetic smiles. Even some of her business partners came to check on her. The room buzzed with voices. "You'll be fine. Doctors can be wrong. God will heal you. Stay strong." Everyone said comforting things. Amara tried to believe them. She smiled politely, even when tears filled her eyes. But at night, when everyone had gone home and the hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines, fear crept into her heart. She stared at the ceiling and wondered what her future would look like. Would she ever walk again? Would she ever run her company the way she used to? Would people still respect her? Or would everything slowly slip away? One evening, her brother Kelechi arrived looking unusually serious. He pulled a chair close to the hospital bed. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "Better," Amara replied weakly. That wasn't entirely true, but she didn't want to worry him. Kelechi leaned forward slightly. "I spoke with the board members today." Amara raised an eyebrow. "The board?" "Yes, they're concerned about the company operations while you recover." Amara nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Her company employed thousands of people. Major decisions needed to be made daily. Investors expected leadership." "What did they say?" she asked. Kelechi cleared his throat. "Well, they think it might be best if someone temporarily oversees things." Amara frowned slightly. "You mean an acting CEO?" "Yes." "Who?" Kelechi gave a small smile. "Me." Amara blinked in surprise. "You?" "I've been working closely with the company for years," he said quickly. "I understand the business. And it's only temporary until you recover." Amara hesitated. Kelechi had always been good with people, but he had never actually managed a major business before. Still, he was her brother, and right now she could barely sit up without assistance. "Okay," she said finally, "but make sure the board approves everything." Kelechi's smile widened. "Of course." He squeezed her hand gently. "Don't worry about anything. I'll handle it." For the first time since the accident, Amara felt a small sense of relief. At least someone she trusted was helping. But as days turned into weeks, something strange began to happen. The hospital visits slowly started decreasing. At first, her cousins stopped coming as often. Then her business partners became too busy. Then even some close family members stopped appearing altogether. Excuses became common. "I'm stuck in traffic. I have an important meeting. I'll come tomorrow." Tomorrow rarely came. Even Kelechi's visits became shorter. Instead of sitting and talking for hours like he used to, he now stayed only a few minutes. "Company issues," he often explained. "There's a lot to handle." Amara understood. Running a billion-dollar company wasn't easy. Still, the loneliness in the hospital room grew heavier each day. 3 weeks later, the doctor finally delivered news about her discharge. "You're stable enough to leave the hospital," he explained, "but you'll need long-term physiotherapy and assistance at home." Amara nodded. Home. She was eager to return to her mansion. At least there she would feel comfortable. Her family could help her recover. Her staff would take care of daily needs. Everything would be fine, or so she believed. The day she returned home, a large wheelchair van transported her to the mansion. As the gates opened and the car drove inside, Amara looked around the familiar grounds. The gardens were just as beautiful as she remembered. Tall palm trees swayed gently in the wind. The fountain near the entrance sparkled in the sunlight. But something felt different. Quiet. Too quiet. Normally the house buzzed with activity. Maids walking through the halls, security guards at the doors, staff moving around. Today the place felt strangely empty. The driver helped her into her wheelchair and rolled her inside. The marble floors gleamed beneath the bright chandelier lights. But the house felt colder somehow. "Where is everyone?" Amara asked. The driver shrugged slightly. "I'm not sure, madam." Her mother appeared from the living room moments later. "Amara, you're home." She hugged her gently. "How was the drive?" "Fine," Amara said. Her father soon joined them. They talked for a while, discussing her recovery plans. But as evening approached, Amara noticed something odd. Several staff members were missing. Her personal chef was nowhere to be seen. Neither was her usual house manager. When she asked about them, her mother waved the concern away. Some of them took time off. Amara accepted the explanation. But the next morning, things became even stranger. When Amara woke up, no one came to help her. Normally a maid would bring breakfast or assist her in getting ready. Today, the hallway remained silent. After waiting nearly an hour, she carefully rolled her wheelchair out of the bedroom. The house felt unusually quiet again. She eventually found her brother sitting in the living room. He was scrolling through his phone. "Kelechi," she said. He looked up. "Oh, good morning. Where are the staff?" He shrugged casually. "Some of them resigned." "Resigned?" Amara repeated. "Yes, maintaining such a large staff is expensive." Amara frowned. "But that's never been an issue before." "Well," Kelechi replied lightly, "things change." Something about his tone bothered her. But she was too tired to argue. Over the next few days, more strange changes appeared. Her personal assistant stopped visiting. Her driver was rarely around. Even the security presence at the gate seemed reduced. Meanwhile, Kelechi spent more time locked inside the home office. When Amara asked about company matters, his responses were vague. "Everything is under control. Don't stress yourself. Focus on recovering." But late at night, Amara often overheard him making phone calls. Serious phone calls. Discussions about contracts, shares, company control. She couldn't hear everything clearly, but something felt wrong. Very wrong. One afternoon she rolled her wheelchair into the office hallway and knocked on the door. Kelechi opened it halfway. "Yes. I wanted to ask about the company reports." "There's nothing for you to worry about," he said quickly. "I'd still like to review them." He hesitated, then forced a smile. "I'll send them later." But he never did. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, the house that once felt like a palace began to feel like a cage. People who once surrounded her constantly were disappearing, one by one, visit by visit, until the mansion felt emptier than it had ever been. And deep inside her heart, a quiet fear began to grow. A fear that the accident hadn't only taken her ability to walk. It might also be taking everything else she had. The mansion had never felt so quiet. For years, Amara Okoye's home had been a place full of life. Music echoed through the halls during weekend parties. Staff members moved from room to room carrying trays of food. Relatives laughed loudly in the living room, arguing over movies or business ideas. But now the house felt hollow. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive, and every day it seemed to grow worse. Amara noticed the change slowly at first. The housekeeper who used to greet her every morning stopped appearing. The chef who once prepared elaborate breakfasts had vanished. Even the gardener who carefully maintained the beautiful lawns had disappeared. Whenever Amara asked about them, her brother always had an explanation. "They found better jobs. They asked for leave. We're cutting unnecessary expenses." But something about those explanations never felt right. After all, Amara was still one of the richest women in the country. Money had never been a problem. Still, she tried not to question it too much. She was focused on her recovery. Every day she forced herself to do the painful exercises the physiotherapist had recommended. Her arms had grown stronger from pushing the wheelchair around the house. But her legs remained stubbornly still. Some days she tried to stay positive. Other days she cried quietly in her room where no one could see. What hurt the most wasn't just the physical pain. It was the loneliness. Her parents, who once spent hours beside her hospital bed, now rarely spoke to her for long. They often stayed in their rooms or left the house for unknown reasons. Kelechi seemed constantly busy with company matters. Whenever Amara tried to discuss business with him, he quickly changed the topic. "You should focus on healing," he would say. "You can return to work later." But something about his tone always sounded final. One evening, Amara waited in the dining room for dinner. Normally the long table would be filled with food. Tonight it was empty. No plates, no staff, no family. After nearly an hour of waiting, she rolled herself slowly into the kitchen. The large kitchen that once bustled with activity looked strangely abandoned. The counters were bare. The stove was cold. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. Amara opened it. Inside there were only a few bottles of water and some leftover fruit. Confusion spread through her chest. Where was everyone? She eventually grabbed an apple and returned to her room. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but she didn't yet understand what it was. The next morning began like any other. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. Amara woke slowly and reached for the small bell she used to call the staff. She rang it once. The soft chime echoed faintly through the hallway. No one came. She rang it again. Still nothing. Perhaps everyone was busy. She waited a few minutes before ringing it again. Silence. An uneasy feeling crept into her chest. After waiting nearly 20 minutes, Amara decided to check herself. She carefully moved into her wheelchair and pushed open the bedroom door. The hallway outside looked strangely empty. No footsteps, no voices, no sound at all. She slowly rolled down the hallway. The large paintings along the walls seemed to watch her silently as she passed. "Hello?" she called. Her voice echoed faintly. No answer. She reached the staircase and turned toward the living room. It was empty. The large sofas sat untouched. The television was off. The curtains swayed gently in the morning breeze. A chill ran through her body. "Mom?" she called. "Dad?" Still nothing. Her hands began to tremble slightly as she pushed the wheelchair toward the guest wing. The doors were open. The rooms were empty, beds neatly made, suitcases gone. Her heart began to beat faster. She continued through the house, room after room, hallway after hallway. Everywhere she looked, the same unsettling emptiness greeted her. Then she noticed something. The garage door was open. She slowly wheeled herself toward it. The large garage that once held several luxury cars now contained only one vehicle. Most of the cars were gone. A terrible realization began forming in her mind. "No!" she whispered. She turned her wheelchair quickly and rushed toward the main entrance hall. That was when she saw it. A single white envelope lying on the table. Her name was written across it. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. For a moment she hesitated. A strange fear filled her chest. Then she slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Kelechi's. Amara began reading. "Amara, we've been discussing this situation for a long time." Her breathing became shallow. "The truth is that the company cannot continue operating under your leadership anymore." Her heart pounded loudly in her ears. "Your accident has changed everything." Tears began forming in her eyes as she continued reading. "The board has agreed that I should permanently take over management of the company and the family assets." Her hands shook violently. "You can no longer run the business the way you used to. It's better this way." A tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. The final lines of the letter broke what remained of her heart. "We've moved most of the operations and properties into new management. You should focus on adjusting to your new life. Good luck." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. Amara lowered the letter slowly. Her entire body felt numb. They had taken everything. Her companies, her properties, her control, and worst of all, they had left her behind, alone, in the house she had built for them. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her own family had abandoned her. Not strangers, not enemies, the very people she had trusted, the people she had supported, the people whose lives she had changed with her success. They had taken everything, and walked away. A broken sob escaped her lips. For a long time she simply sat there in the silent hallway, clutching the letter tightly. The mansion that once symbolized her success now felt like a prison. Prison built from betrayal. Outside, the bright morning sun continued shining. Birds sang in the trees. Cars passed on the distant road. Life continued as normal. But inside the massive mansion on the hill, the once powerful billionaire sat alone in her wheelchair, abandoned by the very people she loved. And she had no idea how she would survive the days ahead. The first day after her family left, Amara barely moved from the entrance hall. She sat there in her wheelchair, the letter still clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her mind refused to accept what had happened. "They'll come back," she whispered quietly to herself. Maybe they had only gone out for the day. Maybe Kelechi had written the letter in anger. Maybe everything was just a misunderstanding. The mansion was too big to feel empty for long. Surely someone would walk through the door soon. Her mother, her father, her brother, anyone. But hours passed. Morning slowly turned into afternoon, then evening, and no one came. The silence inside the mansion became unbearable. Amara finally forced herself to move. She wheeled slowly into the kitchen, hoping to find something to eat. The refrigerator was almost empty. A bottle of water, 2 apples, half a loaf of bread. That was all. For someone who had once hosted dinners for dozens of guests, the sight was painfully shocking. Amara grabbed one of the apples and rolled back toward the living room. The huge space echoed softly with every movement of her wheelchair. She had never noticed how large the house truly was until now. Without voices, without music, without people, the mansion felt enormous and lonely. That night, Amara tried calling her brother. Her phone rang, then went straight to voicemail. She tried again. The same result. Next, she called her mother. No answer. Her father. No answer. Even some of her cousins. Nothing. It was as if everyone had suddenly vanished from her life. A cold heaviness settled in her chest. For the first time since reading the letter, the full truth began to sink in. They weren't coming back. They had really left her. Alone. The next morning, hunger woke her early. Her stomach growled loudly as she opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot everything that had happened. But then the quiet house reminded her. Amara slowly pushed herself upright in the bed and transferred into her wheelchair. Her arms ached from the effort. Before the accident, she had never realized how difficult simple movements could be. Now every task required careful effort. She wheeled herself toward the kitchen again. The refrigerator looked even emptier than before. Only one apple and the bottle of water remained. She stared at them for a long moment. "Okay," she murmured quietly. "We'll figure something out." She ate the apple slowly, trying to make it last. Then she drank some water. It wasn't much, but it was something. Afterward, she rolled into the living room and stared out the large windows. The city of Lagos stretched far into the distance. Cars moved along the roads. People walked on sidewalks. The world outside continued normally. But inside the mansion, time seemed frozen. Amara tried calling a few old employees. Her assistant, her company accountant, even her lawyer. None of them answered. The feeling of isolation grew heavier with every unanswered call. Eventually she decided to try accessing her bank accounts. If she could order groceries or call for help, maybe things would improve. She opened her laptop, logged into her banking application, and froze. Access denied. She tried again. The same message appeared. Her hands began shaking. No, this can't be right. She attempted to log into another account. Denied. Another. Denied. Her breathing became uneven. They had frozen her accounts. Her brother and the board must have taken control of everything. Even her money. The last piece of security she thought she had left was gone. Amara closed the laptop slowly. Tears blurred her vision. For years she had supported everyone, paid everyone, protected everyone. And now, she couldn't even buy food. The next few days became a painful routine. Every morning she searched the house for anything edible. Old biscuits in a cupboard. A forgotten can of soup. Sometimes she found small things. Sometimes nothing. Moving around the mansion became exhausting. The marble floors made pushing the wheelchair difficult. Her arms grew sore. Blisters formed on her palms. But she forced herself to keep moving. Sitting still made the loneliness worse. Sometimes she wheeled herself into different rooms just to remind herself she was still alive. The enormous dining room. The quiet library. The balcony overlooking the gardens. Each place held memories of a life that now felt distant. One afternoon she rolled into the garage again. The empty spaces where luxury cars once stood felt like another reminder of what she had lost. Even the security guards were gone. The gates outside remained closed, but no one stood watch anymore. Truly was just her, alone in a house built for dozens. By the end of the week, Amara's strength had begun to fade. Her meals were too small. Her body was still recovering from the accident. The lack of proper food made everything worse. One evening she tried to cook something simple. She managed to push her wheelchair close to the stove. But reaching the pots and ingredients from the seated position proved difficult. While trying to lift a small pot, her arm slipped. The pot crashed loudly onto the floor. The noise echoed painfully through the empty house. Amara stared at the mess for a long moment, then slowly covered her face with her hands. Tears slipped through her fingers. "I can't do this," she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the massive kitchen. "I can't live like this." She had once commanded boardrooms filled with powerful executives. Now she struggled just to cook a simple meal. The contrast was unbearable. For the first time since the accident, true despair began creeping into her heart. What if this was her life now? What if no one ever came back? What if she slowly starved inside the mansion? The thought terrified her. That night she barely slept. Every sound in the house made her uneasy. The creaking of wooden floors, the distant wind against the windows, the rustling of tree branches outside. The mansion that once made her feel safe now felt frightening, like a giant empty shell. Days continued passing slowly. Amara lost track of time. Sometimes she sat near the front windows for hours, watching the road outside the gate. Occasionally a car passed, but none ever stopped. No visitors, no deliveries, nothing. Her once powerful life had been reduced to waiting and hoping someone might appear. Anyone. By the end of the second week, her body felt weaker than ever. Even pushing the wheelchair became exhausting. That afternoon she sat near the front entrance, staring at the closed gates in the distance. The bright sunlight outside made the world look alive and hopeful. But inside, the mansion remained cold and silent. Amara leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. She felt tired, so very tired. For the first time in her life, the billionaire who once controlled empires felt completely powerless. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere outside those gates, someone was about to knock on the door. Someone who would change everything. The afternoon sun hung high in the sky, casting long golden beams across the quiet mansion grounds. Outside the tall iron gates, the world moved as usual. Cars drove past, street vendors called out to customers, and the distant noise of Lagos traffic hummed in the background. But inside the large mansion, everything remained silent. Amara sat near the front entrance in her wheelchair, staring blankly at the closed gates in the distance. Her body felt weak, and her arms ached from the effort of moving around the house all morning. She had eaten nothing that day. The last piece of bread had been finished the night before. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her again of how fragile her situation had become. Once this house had been filled with life. Now it felt like an empty museum. Amara rested her head against the back of the wheelchair and closed her eyes. Maybe she should try calling someone again. Maybe someone would finally answer. But before she could reach for her phone, a faint sound echoed through the quiet air. Knock! Amara opened her eyes slowly. Had she imagined it? The house had been so quiet lately that sometimes her mind played tricks on her. She waited. Then it came again. Knock! Knock! The sound was coming from the gate. Amara straightened slightly in her wheelchair. Her heart began beating faster. Someone was outside. She pushed the wheels carefully and moved closer to the large window near the entrance. Through the glass, she could barely see the tall gate at the end of the driveway. A man stood there. He wore a blue uniform and carried a brown mailbag over his shoulder. A mailman. He knocked again loudly on the metal gate. Hello, he called. Delivery. Amara stared in disbelief. She hadn't seen another human being in days. For a moment she simply sat there, unsure of what to do. The mailman waited a few seconds, then knocked again. Hello? Anyone home? Amara quickly turned her wheelchair and began pushing toward the door. The distance felt longer than usual. Her arms strained as she moved across the polished marble floor. By the time she reached the front door, she was breathing heavily. She unlocked it slowly and pushed it open. The bright sunlight outside made her squint slightly. The mailman looked surprised when he saw her. Good afternoon, madam, he said politely. He stepped a little closer to the gate. My name is Daniel. I have some mail deliveries for this address. Amara nodded weakly. Her voice came out softer than she expected. You can come inside. Daniel looked slightly confused. The gate is locked. Oh, Amara realized she hadn't thought that far ahead. She pointed toward the small control panel near the door. Press the green button, she said. Daniel did so. The large metal gates slowly opened with a mechanical hum. He walked up the long driveway toward the house, glancing around the massive property with curiosity. When he reached the front steps, he paused. His eyes widened slightly as he noticed Amara sitting alone in the wheelchair. You're Miss Okoye, right? He asked carefully. Amara gave a faint nod. Yes. Daniel had heard the name before. Almost everyone in the city had. She was famous, a billionaire businesswoman. But seeing her now, alone and pale in the wheelchair, was not what he expected. He handed her the small bundle of letters. These arrived at the post office earlier this week. Amara accepted them quietly. Thank you. Daniel lingered for a moment. Something about the situation felt strange. The mansion looked too quiet, too empty. Usually houses like this had security guards, staff, drivers, people moving around constantly. But today there was no one, just the woman in the wheelchair. Daniel shifted awkwardly. Is everything okay here? Amara hesitated. For a moment she almost said yes. That was the answer she had always given. The safe answer. But something about Daniel's concerned expression made her pause. Her stomach growled suddenly, loud enough for both of them to hear. Embarrassment spread across her face. Daniel frowned slightly. Madam, have you eaten today? Amara looked down at her hands. No. The word came out almost like a whisper. Daniel blinked in surprise. You haven't eaten? She shook her head slowly. I ran out of food. Daniel looked toward the large mansion behind her. His confusion deepened. Where is your staff? They left. Your family? They left too. The words hung quietly between them. Daniel's expression softened. Without another question, he stepped inside the house. Where is your kitchen? He asked. Amara pointed weakly down the hallway. This way. Daniel walked quickly toward it. When he opened the refrigerator, he immediately understood the situation. Almost empty. Only a bottle of water remained. He turned back toward Amara. Please wait here. Before she could respond, he hurried back outside. Amara sat there quietly, wondering if he would return. After everything that had happened, trusting people had become difficult. But 20 minutes later, Daniel walked back through the gate carrying 2 plastic grocery bags. He placed them gently on the kitchen counter. Bread, eggs, milk, rice, even a few vegetables. Amara stared at the food in disbelief. You bought these? Daniel nodded casually. You need to eat. He moved around the kitchen like someone used to simple tasks. Soon the sound of cooking filled the quiet house. Eggs sizzled in the pan. Bread toasted lightly. The smell of warm food spread through the room. Amara felt tears forming in her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had cooked for her. Daniel carefully prepared a small plate and brought it to the table. He placed it gently in front of her. Eat slowly, he said kindly. Amara picked up the fork with trembling hands. The first bite felt almost overwhelming. Warm, real, comforting. Tears slid down her cheeks as she ate. Daniel pretended not to notice, giving her space. After a few minutes, he sat down across from her. You shouldn't be here alone, he said quietly. Amara wiped her eyes. I didn't choose to be. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't ask more questions. Sometimes silence showed more kindness than curiosity. When she finished eating, Amara leaned back in the wheelchair. For the first time in days, she felt a little stronger. Daniel stood up and began cleaning the dishes. You don't have to do that, Amara said softly. He shrugged. It's no problem. When he finished, he walked toward the door. I should get back to work, he said. Amara felt a small wave of panic. The house would become empty again. But before she could say anything, Daniel turned back. I deliver mail in this area every day, he said. He hesitated slightly. I can stop by tomorrow, if that's okay. Amara looked up at him. A stranger, a simple mailman. Yet he had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than anyone else had in weeks. She nodded slowly. I would like that. Daniel smiled warmly. Good. He picked up his mailbag and headed toward the door. As he walked down the driveway, Amara watched him through the window. For the first time since her family abandoned her, the mansion didn't feel quite as empty. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of hope. The next morning, Amara woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered gently through the tall curtains of her bedroom, casting soft golden patterns across the marble floor. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of birds outside. But something felt different. For the first time in many days, the silence of the mansion didn't feel quite as suffocating. The memory of yesterday slowly returned to her mind. The mailman, Daniel, the groceries, the warm meal. Amara sat up slowly and transferred herself carefully into the wheelchair. Her arms still felt weak, but the food she had eaten the day before had given her a little strength. She pushed herself toward the window and looked outside. The gate stood closed as always. The long driveway stretched across the green lawn. Everything looked the same. Still, she found herself watching the gate more closely than usual. Would he really come back? She wasn't sure. After all, Daniel was just a mailman. He had his own life, his own responsibilities. Perhaps yesterday had only been an act of kindness he felt obligated to perform. Maybe he wouldn't return. Amara sighed softly and wheeled herself toward the kitchen. To her surprise, the sight of food in the refrigerator still made her pause. Bread, milk, eggs, rice. Simple things, but to her they now felt incredibly valuable. She managed to prepare a small breakfast for herself with some effort. Cracking the eggs was difficult from the wheelchair, but she eventually succeeded. When she finished eating, she cleaned the small plate and placed it carefully in the sink. Then she waited. The morning passed slowly. Amara tried reading some of the letters Daniel had delivered the day before, but her mind kept drifting. Every few minutes she glanced toward the window. Still nothing. By noon, she began convincing herself that he probably wasn't coming. She rolled toward the living room and turned on the television just to break the silence. But the noise felt strange in the quiet house. Eventually she turned it off again. Around early afternoon, Amara wheeled herself back toward the front window. Just as she was about to turn away, she saw him, a familiar blue uniform, walking toward the gate. Her heart lifted slightly. Daniel had returned. He knocked twice on the gate. Delivery! Amara quickly moved toward the control panel and pressed the green button. The gate slowly opened. Daniel walked up the driveway carrying his usual mailbag, but this time he also held a small paper bag in his other hand. "Good afternoon," he said with a friendly smile when he reached the door. Amara smiled back, something she hadn't done much lately. "Good afternoon." He handed her a few envelopes. "Just some letters today." Then he lifted the small paper bag. "And I brought something." Amara looked curious. "What is it?" "Lunch," he said simply. Inside the bag were 2 containers of rice and stew. Amara blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to do that." Daniel shrugged casually. "I made extra." Of course, that wasn't entirely true. He had bought it from a nearby restaurant on his lunch break. But he didn't feel the need to explain that. He placed the containers on the kitchen table. "Let's eat." The simple sentence felt strangely comforting. Amara rolled closer to the table. They ate quietly at first, but after a few minutes Daniel spoke. "So, how are you feeling today?" "A little better," Amara admitted. "Good." He glanced around the large kitchen again. "Have you been able to move around the house okay?" "Mostly," she said. "It's tiring though." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. After lunch, he stood up and stretched slightly. "I should get back to work." Amara felt that small wave of loneliness again. But before she could say anything, Daniel added, "My route passes here every day around this time." He hesitated briefly. "If you don't mind, I can stop by when I finish delivering the mail." Amara looked up at him. "You'd really do that?" "Sure," he said with a small smile. "It's on the way." She nodded gratefully. "I'd like that." And so a quiet routine began. Every afternoon, Daniel stopped by the mansion. At first, the visits were simple. He would bring the day's mail. Sometimes he brought food. Other times he simply sat and talked with Amara for a while before leaving. The conversations were small at first. Weather, daily events, stories about his delivery route. Daniel told her funny stories about dogs that chased him while he delivered letters, or customers who forgot to check their mailboxes for months. Amara found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. Slowly, the mansion began to feel a little less empty. But one afternoon, Daniel noticed something that concerned him. Amara was struggling to push her wheelchair across the living room. Her arms trembled with the effort. "You shouldn't strain yourself like that," he said gently. "I have to move somehow," she replied. Daniel crouched beside her chair. "Have the doctors given you any physiotherapy exercises?" Amara sighed. "Yes, but what?" She looked away. "What's the point?" Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? The doctor said I may never walk again. Her voice sounded defeated. So the exercises probably won't change anything. Daniel studied her quietly for a moment. Then he shook his head. Doctors don't always know everything. Amara looked at him skeptically. You think I can just stand up and walk again? No, he said calmly. But I think the human body is stronger than people believe. He stood up. Show me the exercises they gave you. Amara hesitated. It had been weeks since she even attempted them. Still, she rolled toward the living room floor where the physiotherapist had once demonstrated the movements. Daniel listened carefully as she explained. Then he nodded. Okay. He moved a chair nearby. We'll start slowly. We? Amara asked. Yes, Daniel said simply. I'll help you. Amara stared at him. You don't have to do that. I know. He smiled. But I want to. Reluctantly, she allowed him to assist. The first exercise was simple, stretching her legs and trying to activate the muscles. Daniel carefully supported her while she tried. It was difficult, painful, frustrating, but Daniel remained patient. Good, he encouraged. Try again. They practiced for nearly 30 minutes. By the end, Amara was exhausted, but something else surprised her. For the first time since the accident, she felt hope. Daniel stood up and wiped his hands. That's enough for today. Amara leaned back in her wheelchair, breathing heavily. You really think this can work? Daniel shrugged. I think giving up definitely won't. She laughed softly. You're very stubborn. So I've been told. He grabbed his mailbag and headed toward the door. Same time tomorrow? Amara nodded. Yes. As Daniel walked down the driveway, she watched him through the window again. Something inside her heart had begun to change. The mansion was still quiet. Her family was still gone. Her life was still uncertain. But now, someone came back every day. And sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive. The exercises began the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. At first, Amara thought it would only last a few days. After all, Daniel was a mailman with his own responsibilities. It seemed unlikely that he would keep coming back just to help someone he barely knew. But he did. Every afternoon, just as the sun began lowering across the sky, the familiar knock echoed at the gate. Knock! Knock! Delivery! And every time, Amara felt a small spark of happiness rise inside her chest. It became the one moment of the day she looked forward to the most. Daniel never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes he brought fresh bread or fruit. Other days it was takeaway food from a small restaurant nearby. Occasionally he brought nothing but a warm smile and his usual mailbag. But he always brought something even more important. Encouragement. Ready for today's training? He would say cheerfully as he set down his bag. Amara often groaned in response. Training? You make it sound like I'm preparing for the Olympics. Daniel chuckled. Every champion starts somewhere. The first few days were incredibly difficult. Most of the exercises involved simple movements. Stretching her legs, attempting to flex muscles that barely responded, and practicing shifting her weight. But even those small actions drained her energy. Sometimes she became frustrated. Sometimes she became angry. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after they started training, Daniel brought a pair of lightweight walking supports. Amara raised an eyebrow. What are those? Walking bars. She stared at him. You're joking. Nope. Daniel, I can barely stand. That's why we practice. Amara laughed nervously. You're really serious about this? Of course. He positioned the bars carefully. Ready to try? Amara hesitated. Fear crept into her mind. What if she fell? What if her legs failed completely? But Daniel's calm voice interrupted her thoughts. I'm right here. She took a deep breath. Okay. With his support, she slowly pushed herself up. Her legs trembled as her feet touched the ground. Daniel held her arms firmly. You're standing, he said quietly. Amara looked down at her feet. Tears filled her eyes again. Yes, she had been standing more often recently. But this moment felt different, because now, they were about to try walking. Shift your weight slightly forward, Daniel instructed. Amara did. Her body swayed uncertainly. Now move your left foot. She hesitated. I'm scared. That's normal. Daniel squeezed her arm gently. But you're ready. Amara closed her eyes briefly. Then she moved her foot. Just one step. But it was a step. Her body froze in disbelief. I walked, she whispered. Daniel laughed happily. Yes, you did. Amara looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I actually walked. He nodded proudly. And tomorrow you'll take two. For the first time since the accident, Amara felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Not just hope for recovery, but hope for life itself. And standing there, supported by the man who refused to give up on her, she realized something else too. Sometimes the people who change your life the most are the ones you least expect. After the day Amara took her first step, something inside her changed. For months, her life had been surrounded by darkness, pain, betrayal, and loneliness. Every morning had begun with the same heavy feeling in her chest, the same question echoing through her mind. Why did this happen to me? But now there was something new. Hope. It was small at first, like the faint glow of a candle in a dark room. But with each passing day, that light grew stronger. And Daniel was the one who kept it burning. Their training sessions became more serious after that first step. Every afternoon, once Daniel finished his delivery route, he would arrive at the mansion with his usual knock. Delivery! Amara would roll toward the control panel and press the green button to open the gate. By the time he reached the front door, she was already smiling. You're getting faster with that chair, he teased one afternoon. That's because someone keeps torturing me with exercises, she replied playfully. Daniel laughed. If you call walking torture, then yes, I'm guilty. The progress continued slowly but steadily. At first, Amara could only take 1 or 2 steps while holding the support bars. Her legs trembled constantly, and her balance was still fragile. But Daniel always stood nearby, ready to help. Good, he would say encouragingly. Now try another step. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she didn't, but she never stopped trying. Beyond the exercises, something else began growing between them. Conversation. At the beginning, their talks had been simple and polite. But as the weeks passed, they started sharing more about their lives. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly exhausting training session, Amara collapsed onto the sofa. I feel like I just ran a marathon, she groaned. Daniel handed her a bottle of water. You'll thank me later. I already hate you, she joked weakly. Daniel sat down across from her. Good. That means the training is working. They both laughed. For a moment, the room felt warm and comfortable. Then Amara looked at him curiously. You know, she said, I've talked about myself a lot, but I don't actually know much about you. Daniel shrugged lightly. There's not much to tell. I doubt that. She leaned forward slightly. Where did you grow up? Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. A small town in Ogun State. Really? Yeah. He smiled faintly. My father was a mechanic. My mother sold vegetables in the market. Amara listened quietly. Were you always a mailman? Daniel chuckled. No. I actually wanted to be a teacher. What happened? Life, he said simply. He explained that after finishing secondary school, his father became sick. Medical bills quickly drained the family's savings. Daniel had been forced to find work immediately to support them. The postal service job was the first stable opportunity he found. I thought it would only be temporary, he admitted. But then time passed. Amara studied him thoughtfully. You sacrificed your dreams for your family. Daniel shrugged again. Family comes first. The word struck Amara deeply. Her own family had done the opposite. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel cleared his throat. What about you? He asked. You built a billion-dollar company before turning 35. 32, she corrected. He raised an eyebrow. That's even more impressive. Amara smiled faintly. It didn't feel impressive at the time. She told him about her childhood in Enugu, fixing the broken computer at 14, and building her company from a tiny apartment. Daniel listened carefully. "You must have worked incredibly hard," he said. "I did." She paused briefly. "But the funny thing is, success didn't give me the life I thought it would." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" Amara glanced around the huge mansion. "All of this," she said quietly, "looked perfect from the outside. But most of the people around me were only here because of money." Daniel nodded slowly. "I figured something like that." She looked at him in surprise. "You did?" "Well," he said thoughtfully, "people show their true character when money is involved." Amara laughed softly. "That's definitely true." Their conversations became longer each day. Sometimes they talked while eating lunch together. Other times they sat on the balcony overlooking the gardens, enjoying the cool evening breeze. Daniel often shared funny stories from his delivery route. One story involved a dog that chased him down the street every Tuesday. Another involved a customer who accidentally mailed a letter to their own address. Amara laughed so hard that tears formed in her eyes. "I haven't laughed like this in years," she admitted. Daniel smiled warmly. Laughter is good therapy. But there were also quieter moments. Moments when neither of them spoke. Moments when they simply sat together in comfortable silence. Amara began noticing small things about him. The way he always rolled up his sleeves when working. The way he smiled whenever she made progress during exercises. The way he never once treated her like a billionaire. To Daniel, she wasn't a famous businesswoman. She was simply Amara. And that meant more to her than he could possibly imagine. One evening, after a long training session, Amara managed to walk nearly 6 steps without stopping. Daniel clapped proudly. "That's amazing!" Amara laughed breathlessly. "I think my legs are about to fall off." "But you did it." She sat down, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Only because you wouldn't let me quit." Daniel leaned against the wall. "Someone has to believe in you." Amara looked up at him quietly. "You always do." Daniel seemed slightly embarrassed. "Well, someone should." She studied his face for a moment. Then she asked a question she hadn't expected to ask. "Why did you help me?" Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" "You could have walked away the first day you saw me here," she said softly. "You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything." He looked thoughtful. Then he shrugged slightly. "You needed someone." The simplicity of his answer stunned her. No grand explanation. No complicated reason. Just kindness. Amara felt something warm spread through her chest. For years she had met people who calculated every decision based on profit and advantage. But Daniel had helped her without expecting anything in return. That realization touched her deeply. As the sun slowly set outside the large windows, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Amara looked at the man standing beside her. The man who had fed her when she was starving. The man who helped her walk again. The man who returned every single day. And suddenly, she realized something surprising. Somewhere along the way, she had started falling in love with him. Not because of his job. Not because of his status. But because of his heart. And for the first time in her life, the billionaire who once had everything realized that the most valuable thing she had ever found was sitting quietly beside her. By the 3rd month of training, Amara could walk across the living room without assistance. The first time she managed to do it completely on her own. Daniel stood near the doorway watching carefully, ready to help if she stumbled. "Are you sure you don't want me to hold your arm?" he asked cautiously. Amara shook her head. "No." Her voice carried determination. "If I'm going to do this, I have to do it myself." Daniel nodded but stayed close. "All right, I'm right here." Amara took a deep breath and placed her hands lightly on the support bars. Her legs trembled slightly, but not nearly as much as they used to. Slowly, she lifted her left foot. Step. Then her right. Step. Her heart pounded loudly with every movement. Months ago, this simple act had seemed impossible. But now she kept going. One step, then another, then another. She crossed the entire room. When she reached the other side, she turned around with a wide smile. I did it. Daniel clapped loudly. You did more than that. You walked like someone who never stopped. Amara laughed breathlessly. I'm not that good yet. But you're close. She sat down on the sofa, wiping sweat from her forehead. You know what this means? She said thoughtfully. Daniel tilted his head. What? Amara's eyes hardened slightly. It means I'm not helpless anymore. Daniel watched her carefully. What are you thinking? She leaned back against the couch. For months I focused only on surviving. Her voice grew firmer. But now, I want my life back. Daniel understood immediately what she meant. Her family, her company, her stolen empire. You're talking about the businesses, he said. Amara nodded slowly. They took everything. Daniel remained quiet. And they thought I wouldn't fight back, she added. But they forgot something. What's that? Amara looked at him with a confident smile. I built that empire from nothing. Daniel crossed his arms thoughtfully. So what's the plan? She leaned forward. The first step is finding a lawyer. The next morning, Amara made the call she had been avoiding for weeks. She dialed the number of her longtime legal advisor, Barrister Chinedu Okafor. He had represented her company for years before the accident. When he answered the phone, his voice sounded surprised. Miss Okoye? Yes, Amara said calmly. Where have you been? He asked immediately. We've been trying to reach you for months. I know. She explained everything briefly. The accident, her paralysis, the isolation, and her family's sudden takeover of her businesses. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the lawyer spoke. This is serious. I know. They transferred company ownership without your authorization? Yes. That's illegal. Amara allowed herself a small smile. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. The lawyer's tone became firm. I need to review all documents immediately. Come to the house tomorrow, Amara said. Bring everything you can find. The following afternoon, Barrister Okafor arrived at the mansion. He looked shocked when Amara opened the door herself. You're walking. Working on it, she said with a small smile. Daniel stood nearby, observing quietly. Amara introduced them. This is Daniel. He's been helping me recover. The lawyer nodded politely. Nice to meet you. They moved into the large living room where Amara had already gathered several folders of old company documents she managed to retrieve from the office. For nearly 2 hours, the lawyer studied the paperwork carefully. His expression grew more serious with every page. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. This is worse than I expected. Amara crossed her arms. How bad? Your brother didn't just temporarily manage the company. He tapped one of the documents. He attempted to transfer permanent ownership. Daniel frowned. Can he even do that? Not legally, the lawyer replied. Amara leaned forward. So we can stop him? Yes. How? The lawyer smiled slightly. With evidence. He explained that many of the signatures on the documents appeared suspicious. If they could prove forgery, the courts could reverse the entire takeover. They were confident you would never challenge them, the lawyer said. Amara nodded slowly. They thought I was broken. Well, the lawyer said firmly, they're about to learn otherwise. The legal battle began within weeks. The court case quickly gained attention. The story of the billionaire woman betrayed by her own family spread rapidly through the media. Newspapers published headlines daily. Businesswoman claims family stole her empire. Court investigates corporate takeover. Amara attended every hearing, walking slowly but confidently beside Daniel. Her brother Kalechi looked shocked the first time he saw her enter the courtroom. You're walking? He asked in disbelief. Surprised? She replied calmly. His expression hardened. You should have stayed out of this. Amara's voice remained steady. You should have stayed honest. During the trial, the evidence became overwhelming. Financial records showed suspicious transfers. Witnesses testified about forged signatures. Several former employees admitted they had been pressured to approve documents they never fully reviewed. The judge listened carefully. Finally, after weeks of hearings, the verdict arrived. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the decision. The court finds that multiple asset transfers were conducted through fraudulent documentation. Kelechi's face turned pale. All company ownership and properties will be returned immediately to Miss Amara Okoye. A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Amara closed her eyes briefly. It was over. She had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around her. Miss Okoye, how does it feel to reclaim your empire? Amara paused before answering. Winning the company back is important, she said. But what matters more is justice. And what will you do now? She glanced at Daniel standing quietly beside her. Now, she said with a small smile, I rebuild my life. And for the first time since the accident, she realized something surprising. Getting her wealth back felt good. But the person standing beside her meant far more than any company ever could. Life slowly returned to the mansion on the hill. But this time, everything felt different. After the court ruling restored Amara's companies and properties, news spread quickly across the country. Business channels discussed the case endlessly. Newspapers praised her determination. Many people called her victory inspiring. Within weeks, her businesses began returning to normal operations. Executives who had quietly stepped aside during the legal battle returned to their offices. New security guards stood once again at the mansion gates. Staff members were hired to restore the household. The once silent house was alive again. Footsteps echoed in the hallways. The kitchen buzzed with activity. Phones rang constantly with business calls. But despite all the movement and attention, Amara noticed something important. The mansion still felt peaceful. Because this time, the people around her were carefully chosen. She had learned a painful lesson. Not everyone who smiles beside you truly wishes you well. Many of the relatives who abandoned her attempted to return once they heard about the court decision. Cousins called with cheerful voices. Aunts sent messages claiming they had always supported her. Even distant family members tried to reconnect. But Amara refused most of them politely. The betrayal had been too deep. Some relationships could not simply be repaired. And surprisingly, she didn't feel angry anymore. She simply felt wiser. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after the court case ended, Amara stood in the mansion garden. The warm breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers across the large lawn. The fountain near the entrance sparkled under the afternoon sun. She stood there on her own 2 feet. No wheelchair, no support bars, just strength. Walking was still slightly difficult, but the improvement was remarkable. Daniel approached from the house carrying 2 glasses of juice. You're standing again, he said with a smile. Amara turned toward him. You sound surprised. Well, he joked. You used to threaten to collapse every time we practiced. She laughed softly. That was before you turned into my personal drill instructor. Daniel handed her one of the glasses. You're the one who refused to quit. They stood together quietly for a moment, looking across the garden. Life had changed dramatically over the past few months. Amara's companies were stronger than ever. Her reputation had grown even more powerful after the court victory. Investors from several countries were now competing to partner with her company. But despite all the success, the most important change in her life had nothing to do with money. It was the man standing beside her. Daniel had remained with her through everything. Even after the legal victory, he still visited the mansion almost every day. At first he insisted it was only to continue her exercises. But the truth was simpler. They enjoyed each other's company. They ate meals together, talked for hours. Sometimes they simply walked slowly through the gardens in comfortable silence. Daniel never tried to take advantage of her wealth. He never asked for money. He never tried to impress her with big promises. He remained the same humble man who knocked on her gate that first afternoon. And that was exactly why she loved him. Amara turned toward him thoughtfully. You know something? She said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That usually means you're about to ask a serious question. She smiled. Maybe. He leaned casually against the garden railing. All right, I'm listening. Amara hesitated for a moment. Her heart began beating slightly faster. Throughout her life, she had faced difficult negotiations, billion-dollar contracts, and powerful investors without fear. But this moment made her nervous, because this time it wasn't about business. It was about her heart. "Daniel," she began slowly. "Yes, you changed my life." He shook his head immediately. "No, you changed your own life." She smiled softly. "You're wrong." He looked confused. "When I was starving in this house, you fed me. When I believed I would never walk again, you helped me stand. When everyone else disappeared, you came back every day." Daniel looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "I only did what anyone would do." Amara laughed gently. "No," she said. "You did what a good man would do." He looked down at the garden path quietly. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Amara reached out and took his hand. Daniel looked surprised. Her voice softened. "I've spent my whole life building businesses and chasing success." She looked directly into his eyes. "But the most valuable thing I found is you." Daniel blinked in shock. "Amara," she interrupted him gently. "Spend the rest of your life with me." Daniel stared at her. "You mean?" She nodded. "Marry me." For a moment Daniel said nothing. He looked stunned. "A billionaire just proposed to a mailman," he said slowly. Amara laughed. "I'm serious." Daniel ran a hand through his hair nervously. "This is unexpected. Is that a no?" she teased. "No," he said quickly. Then he paused. "But, are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Your world is very different from mine." "Not anymore." Daniel studied her face carefully. "You deserve someone powerful. Someone from your world." Amara squeezed his hand. "I already had that world." She gestured toward the mansion. "Look how that turned out." Daniel smiled faintly. "You really want a mailman?" "I want the man who never abandoned me." Silence settled between them again. Then Daniel finally smiled. "Well, in that case." He gently pulled her closer. "Yes." Amara's face lit up instantly. "Really? Really?" She laughed happily and wrapped her arms around him. In that moment nothing else mattered. Not the mansion. Not the companies. Not the billions of dollars. Only the man who had loved her when she had nothing left. And the future they would now build together. News of Amara Okoye's engagement spread across the country faster than anyone expected. At first, only a few people knew about it. Close friends, a handful of trusted employees, and the lawyer who had helped her reclaim her companies. But within days, rumors began circulating online. Then one of the major newspapers published the headline that shocked everyone. "Billionaire businesswoman engaged to local mailman." The story exploded across social media. Some people celebrated the love story. Others were skeptical. How can a billionaire marry a mailman? Is this real? Maybe it's just a rumor. But Amara didn't care about the opinions of strangers. For the first time in years, she was living a life that felt genuine. The weeks leading up to the wedding were surprisingly peaceful. The mansion, once filled with betrayal and loneliness, now buzzed with joyful preparations. Designers visited daily to help plan the ceremony. Florists filled the halls with colorful arrangements. Event planners moved around with schedules and lists. But Amara insisted on keeping the celebration simple. "I don't want a circus," she told the planners firmly. "This is a wedding, not a business conference." They eventually settled on a beautiful outdoor ceremony in the mansion garden. The same garden where Daniel had helped her take her first steps again. To Amara, the location felt perfect. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to adjust to the sudden attention. Reporters had started waiting outside the postal office where he worked. Colleagues teased him constantly. "Don't forget us when you become a billionaire husband," one joked. Daniel laughed it off, but deep down he felt a little overwhelmed. One evening, he arrived at the mansion looking unusually quiet. Amara noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. Daniel sighed as he sat down beside her. "Your world is very loud," he admitted. She smiled slightly. "You'll get used to it." I'm not sure I want to. Amara turned toward him. Do you regret saying yes? Daniel looked at her quickly. Of course not. Then what's bothering you? He hesitated before answering. People keep saying I'm lucky. Amara raised an eyebrow. Well, you are. Daniel chuckled softly. That's not what I mean. He looked at her seriously. They think I'm marrying you because you're rich. Amara was silent for a moment. Then she gently took his hand. Anyone who believes that doesn't know our story. Daniel nodded slowly. I know, but sometimes it still feels strange. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Daniel, when you found me in this house, I had nothing. You had everything, he said quietly. No, she replied softly. I had lost everything that mattered. She looked into his eyes. You were the only person who stayed. Daniel smiled. And I always will. The day of the wedding arrived under bright, clear skies. The mansion garden had been transformed into something breathtaking. White chairs lined a long walkway decorated with flowers. Soft music played gently in the background. The fountain sparkled under the sunlight, surrounded by elegant arrangements of roses and lilies. Guests slowly filled the seats. Business leaders, friends, former employees, a few journalists invited to document the historic moment. Even some people who once doubted Amara's recovery came to witness the event. The atmosphere buzzed with curiosity. Everyone wanted to see the billionaire bride and the humble mailman groom. Inside the mansion, Amara stood in front of a large mirror while her stylist made the final adjustments to her dress. The gown was elegant but simple, flowing white fabric with delicate lace along the sleeves. Her reflection stared back at her, confident, happy, strong. She remembered the day she sat in the same house, starving and abandoned. The contrast felt unbelievable. A knock came on the door. Her assistant peeked inside. It's time. Amara nodded. Her heart began beating faster, not from fear, from excitement. Outside in the garden, Daniel stood nervously near the altar. He wore a dark suit that had been carefully tailored for him. His hands were clasped tightly together. A close friend leaned over and whispered, Relax. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. Daniel laughed nervously. This feels bigger than delivering mail. The guests chuckled softly. Then the music changed. Everyone turned toward the garden entrance. Amara appeared, walking slowly but confidently down the flower-lined path. The crowd fell silent. Many of the guests had heard about her accident. They knew how long she had been unable to walk. Seeing her now, standing tall and walking proudly, felt almost miraculous. Daniel stared at her in amazement. Even after months together, the sight still filled him with pride. She reached the altar and smiled at him. You clean up nicely, she whispered. Daniel grinned. You walk pretty well. The officiant began the ceremony. Today we gather to celebrate not just a marriage, but a story of resilience, kindness, and love. The guests listened quietly. As the vows began, Daniel spoke first. His voice was calm but emotional. When I first knocked on your gate, I thought I was delivering mail. A few guests chuckled softly. But instead, I found someone who needed help. He looked at Amara warmly. And somehow, that moment changed both of our lives. Amara felt tears forming in her eyes. Daniel continued, I promise to stand beside you in every challenge, to remind you of your strength when you forget, and to love you whether you are a billionaire or simply the woman who laughs at my terrible jokes. The crowd smiled. Then it was Amara's turn. She took a deep breath before speaking. When I lost everything, I discovered something important. She glanced at the guests briefly. Money attracts many people, but kindness attracts the right ones. She turned back to Daniel. You loved me when I had nothing. You believed in me when I couldn't even stand. Her voice softened. And because of you, I learned what real love looks like. A tear rolled down her cheek. I promise to walk beside you for the rest of my life. The officiant smiled warmly. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel didn't wait another second. He kissed her. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Cameras flashed. Music filled the garden. But Amara barely noticed any of it. All she could see was the man standing in front of her. The man who had knocked on her gate on the darkest day of her life. Later that evening, as the celebration continued and guests danced under the glowing lights of the garden, Amara and Daniel slipped away to the balcony overlooking the city. The same balcony where she once stood alone wondering if anyone truly cared about her. Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "Happy?" he asked. Amara leaned against him. "Happier than I've ever been." She looked out across the city lights. Once she had believed success meant wealth, power, and recognition. Now she understood something much deeper. When she was rich, everyone stayed. When she was broken, everyone left. Except the one man who truly loved her. And as she stood there beside him, Amara realized something that no amount of money could ever buy. She finally had everything that mattered. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.